I think one of the key things that a leader needs to do is to champion change and champion continuous change. And what I learned from my experience, particularly 20 years at a senior level in the public service, was always distrust those leaders who will argue that it is now time to bed things down. The one thing I've learned is they always want to bed things down. One of the things that I was keen to do in the public service was to really reform the way the Australian public service worked. We were operating at the time under a piece of legislation, the Public Service Act, which had been written in 1922, and it had been amended and added to progressively through to the 1990s, until it had become this huge tome, not as quite as big as the Guide to Taxation, but getting pretty near it. And the aim that I was trying to drive was to move away from that very prescriptive, highly regulated public service and move to a public service that could be based on values. And in fact, we did eventually move from a 400-page Public Service Act to a 26-page Public Service Act. It took a long time, though, and what I learned through that period is that the number of people I met in leadership positions who would say, look, the reforms we introduced 5 years ago, those changes have been really valuable, and we can see the improvement, but we now need to bed those down before we go on to the next stage. The reality is that 5 years previously they had been saying exactly the same thing. There are some people who are innately bedders down, who always only see, if at all, the advantage of change after the event. And yet, if you are pushing to improve performance, and all organisations, government, private sector, not-for-profit sector, all organisations have got to look at improving performance. You can only do it if you have continuous change in matters big and small, always looking for how to do things better. Now, this is one of the key challenges, I think one of the key differences with leadership in the not-for-profit sector, because not-for-profit organisations have a distinctive quality, which is they are nearly always driven by mission. You know, their aim is not shareholder return or profits. The aim is to have a beneficial community and social impact. Because people come into organisations driven by mission, ironically, they often very much resistance to change. Many of the leaders you get in not-for-profit organisations, many who serve on the boards of not-for-profit organisations, have been part of that organisation for 20 or 30 years and are therefore very hesitant about change. I chair an organisation called the Australian Rural Leadership Foundation, and it provides leadership training to try and sustain resilient rural communities, to provide leadership training for people who are going to be the leaders in those communities. And we've on to our 17th program now. Now, the people who've been through earlier programs, to a very large extent, loved the program. One of the dangers is they almost want to set it in aspic, to preserve it as it was when they went through. So when I'm trying to say, well, actually, the environment has changed significantly over the last 15 years in terms of our understanding of leadership and the time frames in which to deliver it and the financial pressures we face, it's uncomfortable. People would prefer to preserve the program to which they were committed that seems to echo the mission. And one of the real challenges is not-for-profit leadership is to say, no, we can preserve our mission, we can preserve our values, but we need, nevertheless, to change over time in order to be able to do that.